Okay, so we'll continue watching my other laptop just for a minute as I introduce our panelists. But first, our learning objectives is to discuss the importance of redesigning the workplace in our COVID-19 environment. Second, discuss how HVA systems relate to COVID-19 and what we can do with them. Discuss the relocation, but also talk about office hubs as a concept in the context of remote working. And finally, learn from our panelists about workplace technology and materials. Okay, so if we go to Kendra here. So I like Kendra's bio. It starts out with she very early on in her career got interested or kind of exposed to estimating, which she really liked, to the point where she wanted to become a full-time estimator. And she went to her boss and proposed this, and he laughed at her and said that, and his words were, "Girls can't be estimators." So she immediately left his office and went to another construction electrical contractor's office, explained her passion about estimating, and was offered a job on the spot. She enjoyed estimating so much that she eventually ran her own estimating company. And then there became a time in her career where she wanted to better position herself to more successfully guide projects in the right direction, make early decisions that would create better experiences for the entire design and construction team along with the client. She's now a principal at Facilicorp, and not only is leading the company and clients, but encouraging and mentoring project managers to be both better professionally and personally. And our next panelist is Brett. Brett is, well, he's been an architect since he was 16 when he designed and had his first house built. And then a couple years later, when he turned 29, he had his own practice and real estate development firm, which was successful until he joined Gensler and worked on projects across many areas, including corporate workplaces, office buildings, both small and large. And then recently in 2015, he took a personal leap with his family to move to California and join a small company called LinkedIn. And at LinkedIn, he is now the global head of design and build workplace, which is quite impressive in terms of what LinkedIn is today. Our next speaker is John. And John's career is 33 years. He's been in corporate real estate and facility management. Currently, he's the vice president of global real estate and workplace services at Juniper Networks. As far as I can tell on this list, John has worked for virtually every single major tech company in Silicon Valley. He oversees hundreds of offices and R&D locations worldwide. And he has I think what's really impressive is that his 25-person global team has an operating budget of $160 million, supporting the 90,000 Juniper employees around the world. And his focus is to create work environments where employees can do their best work. And finally, Lutisha is our fourth panelist speaker. Lutisha is also an architect with her experiences in project management with a focus on green building, and she is an avid mentor. Her career has spanned 20 years, and she's been involved in many sustainable building projects and various projects of complexity and innovation. Currently, she is the owner's representative and project manager at CBRE for Google, responsible for procuring and executing commercial construction projects. She's also an avid educator and speaker, providing training in green building sustainability for colleges and corporations. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to turn this away, and we can go just to our speakers, and I'll turn off one of these guys. I think that's a pretty funny Silicon Valley tech moment here in our That's company discussion. For our audience, the group of us met briefly last week just to meet each other, and the discussion kind of took three parts. We looked at it from a global workplace standpoint, and then going into the current workplace adaptation, but also then finalize kind of like with the future of the workplace. What I wanted to do, I really like the style that this group has, and I want it to be very kind of much more of a dialogue as opposed to me asking each of you to answer a question 4 times. But I wanted everyone to kind of to introduce themselves and speak very briefly about kind of the scope and the scale that you guys are working within, and bring us kind of up to where we are today, and then we'll finalize bring the discussion through the current and then into the future. So if you guys could kind of talk about your companies, what you guys are doing at a global level, and bring us up to speed to give the audience kind of an understanding of your background and current challenges. Let's see, Letitia, would you mind starting? Let's see if we can unmute Letitia. I think we could probably unmute everybody here if possible.
Yeah. I'm Letitia. I work for CBRE, dedicated to the Google account. So currently I am working on about 500,000 square feet of spaces in various locations and all of that. So this current COVID environment, we would say that, yes, there's a lot of activities going on in terms of relooking at these spaces on a short term as well as on a long term kind of perspective, and how to utilize these real estate to enable people to return to their offices safely and with confidence. So a lot of times what we hear is that from multiple clients, and just within the CBRE, within Google, within various clients on the CBRE side, is that, yeah, there's a little bit of kind of concern and not much desire to return to the offices. People seem to be happy to be working from home, at least on a temporary kind of basis. So that's what we're hearing so far. And it's all across the board from multiple clients, from kind of global, from a global perspective.
Okay. And Kendra, kind of bring us up to speed with your background and the kind of scope of work that you cover and where we are today.
All right. I am not an architect, even in my past life. So I'm looking at this a little bit more on an implementation point. Currently, what we're doing within Facilicore is each of us are, working with our clients to either create updated seating charts that can be as simple as that, right? Where do we make vacant desks to make sure that people are spaced out in a way, I think, like Letitia said, where they feel comfortable and like they're returning back to an environment that cares about their health and safety. And then, as far as doing complete rework within clients, perhaps we had already had a project that was starting, that project has been put on hold, and we've gone back and really worked with them to kind of reimagine what they're going to need day one, but then also how they're going to grow into the need in a few years, right? So it's been a little bit of, planning, of course, but like I said, I think we're a bit more on the implementation side. And we've also been working with all kinds of our furniture vendor partnerships and finding out within them new products that are out that we can implement to help create, whether it's a plexiglass, barrier for the reception desk, down to creating flexible high panels that can be adjusted so that as people do come back in, they've got what they feel is the safe space. So yeah, it's been a lot of studies, and I'm positive the other panelists can say the same thing. Lots of conversations and lots of what ifs.
All right, Brent. tell us about the fantastic things you guys are doing.
Well, it's a huge change for us. We came into this year with about a $550 million CapEx budget, and we put everything on hold when this all happened. And we had about 56 active projects around the world. We were growing so fast that we couldn't keep up with any space constraints, and we got to the point where we were starting to put people in 4-foot desks, albeit it was very begrudgingly, and we had no interest in doing it. This has caused us to kind of have, for the first time, the ear of everybody in the business to completely listen to what we're saying and to understand that we have an opportunity to completely reimagine what the workplace experience is. So we're in the middle of developing with our HR partners a flexible work program. We are developing a remote work program. And in response, we're also completely rethinking the workplace experience. And, that is, we have zero interest in, for the folks who need to come back and have to come back to the office and use plexiglass and things like that to feel safe. That's a solution for them. We have no intention of coming back until we can come back in a meaningful way. We're going to reopen offices when we can, but only for a very limited number of people who don't feel they can be productive from home and who feel a real need to get out of their current situation. But we're not trying to encourage it. For us, this is a long game, and we think that in time we're going to have actually more space per person, and we're going to allocate space differently than we ever did before. But we think at the end of all of this, you'll see somewhat of a decrease in the total square footage and total footprint that is required. That's only because we're likely to have either certain days of the week where people don't come in, or certain people who are remote, or a combination of both. Those are all ongoing conversations, but right now we're in the process of, we asked 10 of our design partners to come up with ideas about what a reimagined workplace could look like on the projects they were working on. And we basically took 2 months of pause, and we're about 2 weeks away from the end of that. We're going to get all those ideas, we're going to aggregate them, and then we're going to develop our vision for what a reimagined workplace looks like. And we're really excited about what that might be, but I think it's going to look very different than anything we have ever done before.
Mm-hmm. Sean, please introduce kind of where Juniper has kind of transitioned over the last 6 months here, and bring us kind of up to speed with what you're seeing.
Sure, yeah. So we have been dealing with the implementation of our COVID response plan. I'm responsible for our entire workplace globally. And Keith, I have to say you were a little generous with the number of employees we have. We have 9,000, not 90,000. Oh. But it is about 2.5 million square feet in about 100 locations. And as that, we work very closely with our environmental health, safety, and security group. And luckily, we actually had a pandemic response plan in place as part of our business resumption planning. We enacted that, and we put in place a number of phases of reoccupying our offices. And we actually, in some locations, got to a phase 2, which was to allow about 20% of our employees to come back in. We put in place in all of our offices all of the PPE and all of the signage and everything to allow employees to come back in. So we're totally prepared to do that. But similar to what Letitia said, is when we offered that to employees, we found a huge reluctance of employees to come back into the office. So where it started as critical employees only, meaning a lot of the infrastructure groups, literally the facilities operations people, the IAT people, and then some of our critical R&D engineers that have to do their work in our lab environments, they came in, but it hasn't expanded much beyond that, even though we've allowed that in our phase 2 and in a number of locations where we did get more people coming in. We've now had to retrench that because there's been more exposures. The local restrictions have been tightened. And so we have probably, where we thought we might have about 20% of our employees in the workplace, we've got about 6. And it seems to be holding at that at the moment.
Okay. Brett, you mentioned this kind of this kind of projected decrease in square footage. Letitia and Kendra and John, are you projecting a similar idea down the road, 2-3 years?
Yeah, no, we've been talking a lot about that. We've kind of broken the conversation into two pieces. One is kind of just the near term, and then the long term. And the near term we're characterizing as the next 18 months. And I kind of think of that as it's almost like triage. It's like we're treating the current condition and what we have to deal with, because nobody knows actually what's happening down the road. And this longer-term view is something I think we're honestly going to take up in 2021 once we get further down the road with COVID and understand what the outlook is. Honestly, our business units, they have no idea how their employees are going to be working, which makes it very difficult for us to map out any solutions, because they can't tell us who's going to be coming into the office and who isn't.
Right.
So we're really focused on, kind of this near-term view at the moment. And kind of similar to what Brett said, is just holding off on, this, answering the question of what is the longer-term view. We'll research it and study it, but there are no answers for us right now.
Now, and oh, sorry, Letitia, go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with John. From what we see on our side is that because decisions have to come from business units, and currently they just cannot project how many people will need to be in the office physically. And our clients can't even tell us whether there's more people or fewer people, and if there are more people, whether they need the office or not. So the conversation is very, very fluid and dynamic. And, we really don't see any kind of, any sort of concrete direction of where we're going. But agree with Brett and that there are many, many studies. Yeah, our client team has just tons of studies. They're just about to begin to roll in. So we see plenty of those decks, and there are really some pretty fresh ideas on how we could use these spaces creatively in collaboration. We see kind of fewer desks and maybe more space dedicated to kind of meeting and collaboration. So that's sort of a general comment on the studies that we have seen so far.
And real quick, I'm guesstimating that we're going to reduce the footprint. We don't have a goal of reducing the footprint, and there is no target for that. We're trying to imagine what the conversation I'm having with our leadership is about intentionality, and going from a model of you go to the office because someone told you have to you go to the office because you have an intention of doing something. There's something you want to accomplish, either with your team or individually, and you are more thoughtful and methodical about the process you undertake to go there. If you just do that and you multiply that across all the people, it's going to say what we're trying to avoid. We have a huge goal to reduce our carbon footprint. And, as part of Microsoft, we have a 2050 carbon pledge to be carbon negative by 2050 for all the carbon footprint for Microsoft since 1974. And so we need to reduce our footprint for that perspective, but it's about being there because you want to be there, because you need to be there, because it's the right place to be to get that work done intentionally, and not because it's just what the boss asked you to do. That is where I think we're headed, and we're kind of anticipating that that's going to become our culture. And I think if you just think through that and look at how space was used in the past at any company, even the companies that utilize their space at the highest levels possible, it was rarely above 60% utilized on any given day. That it was, with the exception of different teams. If you look across the entire portfolio, 60% is a pretty good average. You have a lot of space that's just sitting vacant, and that comes from a model of everybody gets a seat and everyone has an assigned space. That is what drives that behavior. That's what drives the requirement for that much footprint. And I think that is what the change you're going to see in a number of companies going forward.
I agree. I think with many of the clients that we've been talking to, It's not so much that they're talking that they're going to greatly reduce their square footage, but perhaps they have changed their thoughts on expansion, and it's using the existing square footage a little differently. You know, they're realizing that there are some teams that work wonderfully remote. They don't need to always be in the office. So therefore, those teams that do need to be are going to expand the square footage per person. And so perhaps you're utilizing the same amount of square footage, but it's more space dedicated to very specific teams that need to be collaborative while they're working together. And still allowing perhaps some touch-in space for people that typically will be working but may come into the office just occasionally for meetings. And then, like I said, they're definitely looking where we had companies that had really brought in some extra space as far as expanding their square footage. I'm seeing those deals go on hold, or even putting some of that excess space already out on the sub-tenant markets.
Yeah, I'll also add that, if you don't mind, Keith, that one of the curious questions we have to answer is really about our R&D and engineering functions, which prior to COVID, they absolutely and adamantly said they could not have remote engineering. They just couldn't do it. The whole engineering organization would crater if they did that. Well, they have been doing this now for over 4 months, and they've been wildly successful doing it. What they haven't given up on, however, is an aspect of the value of being in the office to have collaboration and innovation conversations, really creative gatherings of people. So what will be curious is when we come out of this, is what is that space going to be that they get together in? Maybe it is just a collaboration space for innovative thought, thought gatherings, more group spaces. They're still holding fast to the fact that they have to get together. So I think that will be true, and I think I'll have to provide spaces that allow them to do that. I'm just not sure if ultimately it means they all have to be together all the time in the office. So kind of what Brett was referring to is intentionally. Maybe their intention is specifically just to collaborate, get together in group meetings. But we don't know the answer yet because they can't tell us. It's just one of the conversations that's come up.
All right, we have a question from the audience in terms of what are your views on distributed work, i.e. satellite offices versus the larger campus? I think we briefly talked about this with these hub type offices. What are you guys seeing and contemplating along those lines?
Brett, you talked a lot about relocation and reallocation of hubs. Can you share?
Yeah. So we don't have any, there is no direction yet, but we're asking the questions. Same as John, engineering, their mindset was we have to be here. And unless you tell me we can't afford to be here, we need to be here. But there is the discussion and the conversation we're pushing is around diversity. And hiring for diversity in engineering is really hard to do in the Bay Area. It's almost impossible. That may change in time if the demographic changes here over time and there's shifts in the country and population and where people live. But right now, it's not a possibility. So us in partnership with our HR team, as I was mentioning before, we are having conversations, and this month of August is going to be very important for us because we're going to learn a lot. We are trying to understand, are there places, and well, we have an unfair advantage maybe from others in that LinkedIn has its own tools using our data and the LinkedIn platform to inform us about what are the best places in the country to locate for different objectives. And so we already have a list of places we could go. The question is, in spite of exactly what John said, and I've had conversations with our head of engineering, head of product, they very much see that productivity has been at or above former levels. They don't believe innovation has been where it should be. So they want people to be together, but it remains to be seen whether they're going to go along with the idea of creating locations outside of the Bay Area, either ones we currently have or ones we don't currently have, where we can hire diverse talent. Then the next question is, would you build an office and co-locate everybody in one place, or would you hire remote in that location and do something similar to what John was talking about and create an office that's not technically office space as you know it. It's a place for on-sites, it's a place for getting together for group events. Maybe there's some desk space that's more like co-working space where the people who do want office space can come in, but it looks very different from anything any of us have done in the past. That is there's a lot of potential for that. But so there's so many options right now, and the variables, what I keep telling everybody on my team and all the teams we work with is we are trying to solve highly complex multivariable equations that don't have one answer. They have a variety of answers. So all we can do right now is scenario plan. So some of the scenarios we're looking at, to your question, Kristen, is if we were going to go to these other markets, whatever they are, wherever they are in the world, what would we create there? And one version might look something like what we've done in the past, and another version might be something unlike anything we've ever built before. And it is for a very different purpose. So right now, we kind of feel like anything is on the table for conversation. And so for us, we're testing all these scenarios. We're having conversations with our leadership. We're getting feedback and buy-in. Ultimately, they want us to give a recommendation that says, this is where we think we should take the business. And so we're hoping within the next couple of months, we'll be confident enough to kind of set a path, knowing that right now in this time and what's going on, it seems like every week we learn something we didn't know yesterday or last week, and we all have to react to it. But we're trying to do this based on a future state and with the hope that we have relief from this at some time soon. And the conversation really is about just a new way of working, because people are enabled with technology and they're given the freedom to choose where they work when they want to work there.
Along those same kind of terms, is there any thought to, say, staff moving away from the Bay Area as a result of this ability to work remotely, from the demographic standpoint, but also this kind of the cost of living?
We've seen that. I think the people that do it or have done it have second homes. So they're working out of Tahoe, they're working out of Arizona, they're working out of other places where, it's like, but we have had people say, look, I have family in Boston, I want to move back to Boston, and do you mind if I do that? And we've allowed that in some location. I wouldn't call it a mass of people that have done it, but there's definitely been requests, and we've allowed that to happen at this point. So I imagine you'll see more of that, because it kind of becomes undeniable that people can still be effective and work, especially if they're doing more administrative tasks, if you will. It lends it much easier to do that kind of remote work.
Right.
We're creating that right now. I mean, that's another part of this conversation and that comes with remote. What is our remote work policy? So again, we've never, in the past, it was, if you wanted to work remotely, you really had to beg and plead and get an exception. And if you did, there was a few rules that went along with it, but it was just, you live someplace else and, you still get paid what you get paid here. You just have to take a small pay cut for being remote. We are likely going to have a much more mature outlook on that going forward, that is focused on area codes or zip codes and, what is the cost of living in that location. I'm certain that we're going to support it. We haven't developed how we're going to support it, but it just makes sense because I think all of us are going to force each other to follow that model, and that's a competitive advantage going forward, is giving people the ability to kind of live where they want to live. But that comes down to, how are you going to do it? Are you going to do it with a completely location agnostic philosophy that I don't care if you're in Nome, Alaska, or if you're in somewhere in the middle of Iowa, or if you're in New York City, or if you're here, or do I want you around a hub? Do I want you close enough that I can get you to the office a couple days a week or a few days a month? That's where the differentiation, I think, will come in, is what people feel is necessary in terms of how they connect. And I think, if anything, we have learned, and we've been doing lots of internal surveys and getting feedback and information throughout this whole process. People yes, people are being productive. They are really, really missing the interaction with their team. And I think that's across the board. And I think likely where most of us will end up in some sort of hybrid where you're asked to come into the office a couple days a week, and then how you spend the rest of your time is up to you. And if you think about it, just practically speaking, you said, what's the ideal week? Well, if I could have a half day on Friday, if I could, ease into my Monday the way I want to, I could get a lot of work done in the middle of the week. And then if I have an appointment, I can go take it. And all of us, any company who was really thoughtful was already doing these things, but a lot of them didn't formalize it. This is going to be, I think, the age of formalizing it, of selling it as a recruiting tool, of saying these are the things you get when you come here, is you get flexibility in life. You can do things the way you need to do them, and we're not going to get in your way. We just want you to do your best work. So let us get out of the way from you doing your best work, and let us give you all these tools you can use to do your best work. But I think the big question none of us know yet is specifically how that's going to impact what we all do, everybody on this call, and designing and building, creating spaces for people. But I do feel, even if the space looks different than it looked last year, if next year, 2, 3 years, 4 years from now, it looks different than it did, I think this is an opportunity a lot of us have wanted for years, and just there was no channel to have this conversation because everybody was too busy to stop and listen long enough to talk about this. But I think it will actually be better. I know it's going to be better. I don't care how good people thought our space was and how well we thought we were doing. The fact that we were having to put people in 4-foot desks tells me something wasn't working. We were somehow broken, because never was that a good. Nobody wants to be sitting all day close enough to somebody that they don't even have to fully extend their arms to touch the person on either side of them. And that is, it's, and I'm excited that we're going to get to do something that's way better than that coming out of all this.
I think I'd add too that regardless, there will be some office, there'll be office component. There will also be an ongoing need for an element of infectious disease control that will exist for a long time, long after COVID is over, COVID-19, because there may be a COVID-20, a COVID-21, a COVID whatever. So this element of designing space with this in mind, it's not going away, not for a while. And we're all going to have to address that, not just now in the near term, but just ongoing. And it'll just become a way of life of how are you managing, designing your cafeterias, your workspaces, your touchless restrooms, your break rooms, the aspect of touchless everything, and just simple things like picking up a coffee cup. Even if there is no COVID going on, people will be much more aware of the fact that somebody just sneezed in the break room and you're going to go pick up a coffee cup. Well, you're going to have a different way of dispensing coffee cups, right? So that'll be an aspect that I know we'll all have to address.
And John, I think it's really important to point out that right now everybody is doing that and saying, I'm not going to worry about sustainability in the environment.
Yeah.
It's super important that we all figure out how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And go back to where we were all headed down this path of no single use, no as little trash as possible. And right now we're all creating way more trash than we have ever created. And we got to figure that out. And I think that's a huge challenge for all of us in the spaces that we create. But you're right, we're having the same conversation. We need to make spaces healthier, period.
Yeah.
Like, just what are all the things, the ways that we transmit even a common cold to one another? We need to figure out how to make that not the case. School and work is where you get sick. We got to figure out how to fix that.
Exactly. Infectious disease control. And you're right. I mean, our cafes are closed right now. We will eventually open them at some point in time. And when we do, it will all be served to you. So it will all be in a container. Your utensils will be there. It'll all be disposable. Nobody will be picking up anything, any communal utensils. There will be no self-serve anything, and it'll all be disposable. That waste stream will be far greater than anything I've ever had in our real estate portfolio. And
do you see any architectural changes? Like, for instance, the way that we can redesign schools in such a way that are safer from active shooter events. Are there there architectural moves that we can think of?
I think queuing of people, how people come into spaces, how it is that if there's large gathering areas, what does that look like? Just for example, like a cafeteria area, I may not have as many seats. I may have different barriers, different breakup of space. The whole aspect of the air conditioning system might be different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
I think it's also going to come down to designing spaces that have well thought out distribution for people to travel, right? So if you're a team sitting in a certain area, there's going to be an entrance or exit that is closer to just that area, so people are not walking through 100 desks to get to a door. And corridors and other things will be designed to be somewhat more directional, so that we're thinking about who we're passing by and how we're moving in different spaces.
Sure.
More than we definitely ever before.
Sure.
So
We're taking, for example, in our buildings where there are 8 stories, we're making an up staircase and a down staircase. At least we're signing it that way. Hopefully people follow the signs, but that's the idea, is that you don't want to pass somebody coming down the stairway.
Right.
So to that point though, we have to figure out how to do this. And one of the things we've been selling as an industry, talking about for 25 years, is the idea of chance interactions and collisions and people running into one another and sharing ideas.
Exactly.
If we start to segregate people and into compartmentalize people too much, it becomes a much different experience. So
Yes.
I think we have to find a really thoughtful solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things we're thinking about are really simple things, like reducing the number of times you touch something that someone else touches, and making it so if you go down a path of accessibility and trying to make your spaces really accessible, you take away barriers. So it's barrier-free design. If you start to do that and take it to another level, then suddenly you can start to create experiences. Yes, security has a voice in this. Yes, they have an opinion. And yes, they want to have barriers, but finding ways to remove barriers is a #1 way to keep people from getting sick, because we're really bad at washing hands and we're really good at touching things and then touching our face after. So that's one of them. Another one is rethinking conference rooms. I said this in our prep session, maybe. I don't know anybody that enjoys sitting in an 8-person meeting in an enclosed, small, medium-sized conference room for an hour.
Yeah.
That is not a pleasant experience for anyone ever. And why do we have it? We have it because people don't want to hear people want to have the privacy to be able to say what they want and not have the conversation overheard by someone outside the room. Well, you start to change your culture and say, you have very few meetings that are in closed rooms, and you start to have meetings that are in open spaces so that the team can hear it. It's like the architecture studio philosophy of, you want those things to be overheard by the junior people so they can learn from the things that are said. Sales teams love it when they have people hearing the things they're saying, because they're hearing what their team is saying, and they can go, hey, that was not the right thing to say on that call. I was overhearing you, and I heard what you said. And that's not really good. The other thing, and we've been testing this for 2 years, we created a bunch of outdoor office space, and they were wildly successful in the Bay Area, like wildly. And we're going down a path right now of developing a bunch more outdoor office space, and then figuring out how do we do that seasonally in other countries where we have a patio or a rooftop or a garden or something, and giving people the option to work outside. There's a really good, right now, New York Times article that talks about the turn of the 20th century. I think it was, I don't know if that was polio or I can't remember which pandemic that was, but the city of New York put all the kids back to school, all outdoors in the middle of the winter, like sitting in sleeping bags all day in class with soapstone heated up under their feet, but nobody got sick when they did that. And it was like a crazy idea, and it was a time where there wasn't a lot of rules around crazy ideas, and they just did it, and it was successful. So I think we have to have some really big ideas to get to the point where, if this is going to be with us for a couple years potentially, or however long, we got to adapt, because we can't keep doing what we're doing. So I think we got to think outdoor space, getting rid of meeting space or rethinking meeting space, and reducing touch points are the 3 areas we're really focused on.
Mm-hmm.
We also talked earlier, one of the other points that you guys were making is the HVAC efficiencies and how important with an airborne pandemic disease how important those systems are and changes to them. Can you share some of that experience?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I mean, currently most HVAC systems don't have the highest, rating filters, and they can't take them. They're not designed for it. I think you'll see different designs in the future. So they'll have a higher grade HEPA filters. But the biggest issue is more so the circulation in the space, and I think that's the bigger challenge. Is it's what happens in that open office area once you're in it, because the fan is going to come on and it's going to provide supply air, and that supply air is going to move whatever's in the room around. I think that's the biggest challenge. In our case, we were bringing a lot of outside air to help dissipate anything. But you can't do that always, and you can't bring in 100%. We can't bring in 100% outside air. So it's a big challenge, I think, from a mechanical standpoint to address it.
One specific thing. Go ahead, Sandra. Sorry.
Oh no, and I was just gonna say I had kind of seen a couple of the questions too. I do think we are going to start seeing some changes in code requirements around exactly that, because of the recognition that we're going to need to be allowing more outside air circulated through, just to create a more healthy indoors environment.
So one unique thing, I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with my team about this. They went on a really detailed study, or on did an investigation around this. And we first went down the path of putting, beyond MERV filters, getting the MERV above MERV 13 and just a higher quality of filter, and getting into HEPA filters even. Then they started looking at UV lights within ductwork and basically trying to zap the air as it comes back to the unit from the return. What they found is that the particles that you're breathing are too heavy, that they fall, and that because we have such low volume HVAC systems, you want the return air really low volume and the supply air so it doesn't make any noise, but doesn't have enough suction to pull anything up. So the stuff just hangs out in the space. So we're having a conversation about, I think what John was kind of alluding to, if you have too much volume, too much air moving, there's that study that, if you guys haven't seen it, there's one floating around out there that talks about these office buildings in Seoul, and a whole bunch of people getting sick in a line. It was the air distribution was pushing air through the space really strong. Everybody in that line was getting sick, and no one else on either side of them was getting sick. I think with the reality is we got to figure out how to, is it, if you have turbulent air, you brought it back up in the air and has a potential to spread to somebody else. If it's a heavy particle, it just immediately falls to the ground. It's not doing harm. The point is, there's a whole bunch of research still needs to be done on this before we actually know what's happening. And right now there's a lot of speculation, but I think what we're seeing is that our conclusion is we're not letting anybody use conference rooms more than one person. We don't care. Like in Microsoft, our parent company is letting people space themselves out in conference rooms. And we're kind of like, you know what? Well, we don't see the value. If you want to have a conversation about that, have the conversation out in the open office and keep your distance, and you can talk, we can create spaces, but going into an enclosed meeting room is really not going to be, it's not worth the risk you're introducing.
Yeah, it increases the risk for sure. The smaller the space, the more people, the more risk.
Along those, the code changing in response, or if our campuses and our buildings are, let's say, generally reducing in terms of their occupancy, I guess that would also help then in terms of the cafeteria count too, in terms of the needs of restrooms and the space that all that would require. I'm kind of curious to know what Google is thinking along these lines. I know that our tech companies, based off of their demographics, are constantly struggling with restroom counts.
So all these elements are correlated to each other. So yeah, with fewer people returning physically, the cafe needs goes down, right? So what we're looking at is really the current cafes. What can we do to kind of control the flow better, to minimize contact and just to minimize the risk? So there are a lot of studies on how to address the current cafes when people are ready to return to the cafe. And just like John said, that the cafes will be used as a serve-only model. So no self-serve, like the salad bars might, self-serving salad bars might go away, and all the machines would need kind of a handle, something you would touch would go away temporarily. So a lot of that would go away. But you know, cafes are very important social space. So on a programmatic level, we don't really see any cafes going away per se. And yeah, and I talked to different clients within CBRE, different accounts, and all the cafes are just really currently just having a partial capacity to serve the people returning to office.
Uh-huh.
So there's no really major change in how cafes are run. Is just partial capacity, removing all the machines that need touching, and they continue to operate. But I can't tell what is going to happen in the future. Maybe like Brett talked about is a different way of design to not to segregate people and not to just allow one way sort of, you go to a theme park, it's one way in, one way out, but it's a safer way for people to socialize and interact. So we don't have that really solution or any kind of model right now, but I think it does have to be looked at in the long term. But food is definitely a big component in our program as an amenity to the employees being in the office.
Yeah, and I'd also add that a component of food in the office space also includes the break rooms, and this was a big decision point for us when we were looking at what to do about our offices. We shut down all of our break rooms, which meant we shut down the refrigerators and the vending machines and the coffee machines and the water machines, everything, right? And that was a big issue because there's a lot of people that don't use the cafes. They bring their lunch in from home and they put it in the refrigerator. We have communal refrigerators. Well, we couldn't have any of that at all. And going forward in the future, it would beg the question, well, do you have that kind of a functionality in your break rooms going forward where people can bring in their lunch, put it in the refrigerator, and who knows what goes on in that refrigerator with people coming and going and touching everything.
So we're studying food as well, and we were already on this path of self-service, pre-prepared meals, or self-service versus either prepared meals or served meals is a lot more expensive. Because if I can go in and just dump 3 loads of food on my plate and only eat one of them, one, it's very wasteful, and 2, it's just a lot more expensive. If we can have portion control and we would do a combination of plated meals and then self-service. I don't think we'll ever have self-service back again. As what my gut says.
Yeah.
One, from a cost perspective, but also from a health perspective. It's really hard to keep that sanitary. And you watch like germaphobes who would be in line and they would kind of be looking around like, how do I touch the spoon? It's like 17 people in front of me just touch the spoon and I'm going to touch it now. Or they immediately wash their hands with the sanitizer as soon as they get through the line. So, I think, but the reality is we're also going to start to look at how we use our app-based technology to do 2 things: to help you order what you want when you want it and have it be so we're not producing lots. We've always had issues with everybody showing up to eat at the same time, regardless of how we try and space it out. People want to eat at noon. I don't know why they want to eat at noon. So we're thinking about things that, one, they make it so everybody doesn't report to the same spaces, to really large cafes. We start to break them down and have break rooms start to act like small cafes, plus having the large cafes. We distribute more people. The reality is most people don't interact with more than like 10 or 12 people at any given time. The rest of that is energy. You're coming into the space and it feels good because there's a lot of people there, but you're not interacting with them. So we're trying to get to figure out what those numbers are, what the sizes are, what the meals look like, how we serve them. So we're doing all sorts of, prognosticating and, ideation right now around what that might be. But we're trying to use our existing spaces to just serve it differently with maybe minor changes to the equipment and the service lines and things like that.
Yeah. That said, I will have to tell you, I've spent many days in a cafe just waiting for my general counsel to show up for his lunch so I could grab him.
Yeah. So Kendra, you represent, or you're working with multiple different clients. Are you seeing trends amongst them in terms of their concerns and goals or asks of you?
Yeah, probably for larger clients, very much along the lines of what we're discussing today. I do think when you start talking about smaller companies, startups, it's still a very different conversation there. Oftentimes they maybe don't have the proper platforms to be doing really effective remote work. There is a greater need for them to be physically working together because they are still very much in that development stage. Those are some of the clients that have really asked for some fast turnaround, immediate solutions. Kind of like I was mentioning earlier, we still have to have people in here. So is there a way to be putting barriers between the benches so that these people can continue working on these and then still breaking out to collaborate? So some of the things though that they're implementing are as simple as a 6-person conference room is now a 2 to 3-person conference room. Chairs are getting removed. Doors are being left open even to outside to increase that kind of airflow. Again, because these are the ones that don't really have the finances to create more efficient work from home experiences. So with them, it's been a little bit of like I did just mention before, right? Directional flow through their space, plexiglass barriers where possible, as far as maybe getting some potentially U-type furniture in one place where we were able to create barriers along the corridor to the end of the rows of 6 foot high, so that at least as people were passing by, those that were close to the aisles are not feeling like they're being as exposed to things. Those are the ones that we're really seeing that immediate reach out. What do we do right now? Some of the others, and you guys can tell me if I'm the only one that thinks this, I feel like they're actually waiting for one of the large companies, the LinkedIns, Googles, what do you do? And they're going to watch closely, and then they're going to be reaching out to implement very similar things.
And do you guys, based off of kind of like the nature of like the behavioral nature of your company, there's always this kind of level of secrecy and I'd say semi-competitiveness. Will your strategies and your research be treated the same way as your technology in terms of talent hiring?
We're planning on we see our ability to share our strategy and our vision for what's possible as a resource to all the users of LinkedIn and any of our customers. And so we plan to share it broadly. So as soon as we have something that's shareable, that we have the employees bought into and the employees believe in, then we're going to share with anybody who wants to listen and to whatever level of detail they want to know.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic, Brett. Really, I do. I think that there are a lot of companies that cannot afford to do the studies that you guys are doing that are really going to benefit from that.
And I'd have to say, I think across the industry, I think that sharing, that spirit of sharing is definitely there. I'm involved in a couple forums where, it's my peers and we're all working through this together. We're all having the same conversation. We're sharing as much as we can. It's in the spirit of, in our profession, trying to manage corporate real estate. I guess we don't see it as proprietary information as much. At the end of the day, it comes down to talent, and I don't think anybody has the magic formula here of you're going to suck up all the talent over to your company. So I think all of this will be shared. I think we will all be watching each other. I don't think there's going to be one solution that fits anybody perfectly. whether large, small, or whatever it is your company does, and what your culture is. I mean, LinkedIn was created in a wholly different type of a mode than other companies, than our company, for example. And we've, prior to all this, looked at LinkedIn, we've looked at Google, we thought, well, let's look at what they're doing. And it's like, some of what they're doing, we like, some of it just wouldn't fit us. So we'll have our own version of something that someone else is doing, and someone will have a version of what we're doing.
There are a lot of kind of general questions about kind of social kind of responses, and I think this kind of comes from this kind of Zoom meeting overload that we discussed last week, and kind of a little bit of fatigue coming out of it, where I think initially for the first, say, several weeks, people were excited about this and thought that this could be a permanent solution, and now people are starting to kind of move away from that and feeling like they do need social engagement. There's questions about, you know, how are companies going to be monitoring people? There's a whole new level of trust that I think you guys touched on earlier. I was also kind of curious to know along those lines what your guys within your facilities are doing from a fitness standpoint, like fitness centers, and then also childcare. I know I have a couple kids that I'm surprised have not joined our meeting yet, but I know I was kind of curious. Is that part of your dialogue out, you know, in addition to the work environment, like we talked about cafeterias?
We don't have childcare of any kind, but we have subsidies for things like that, so people can get their own. But okay. We have lots of wellness spaces of all different types, and none of them are operational right now. Right. But right now we're providing a lot of learning and programs. So there's lots of courses and classes that we're adding to LinkedIn. We're also doing them internally. So our fitness and wellness teams are doing live classes for people to attend. They're asking, going forward, they're asking about a model where they can provide classes from a studio and have them available to anybody in the company that wants them. So so we can have a couple like super high level instructors that, just like Nike does, and, you know, Peloton and all these others, that we could provide our own content and have classes for people to follow, as opposed to trying to deal with everybody. Like, you could have the class streamed to multiple rooms within the company at the same time, or it could be at home, or you could be anywhere. So we're working with them to come up with kind of new models. I think we'll still have our wellness spaces, because it's the same. There is no difference in what we were doing before to what we're doing now. It's like you go to the gym or you come to our space, and having it on campus makes it a lot more convenient for people. But I think we're going to see them expand the offerings to include things that include people at home and other locations, which I think is great.
I can also say, I think some companies are starting to get very creative on those classes and the ability to be outside more. It's the Bay Area. The weather's amazing. I have been seeing some out on the front lawn of a couple companies where they were out doing yoga. And I remember, obviously before this, but Netflix actually used to have CrossFit instructors that would come and in their back parking lot would offer these classes. Was, you know,
we have outdoor, we have a lot of classes outdoors, and these instructors aren't afraid to use the whole campus. They'll use anything they do. It's like, it's almost like it's like parkour, people running around doing crazy stuff. But that's what happens when you have a whole bunch of 25-year-olds and fitness instructors in, you know, California.
Yeah, and I think, Keith, you mentioned there about trust, you know, and how a company manages that. I think that's one of the key elements that's actually changed through this, is that this idea of, can I trust you if you're working remotely? I think that it starts to fall apart now. I mean, in that it's obvious you can tell when people are working or not. And I think that'll continue. So I think that element of working remotely and whether I can trust you just won't be as important, that you'll be able to tell and managers will be able to manage, and that'll just become part of the fabric of what the workplace is. I think the broader question is, how long can we do this without seeing each other? Because the fact is, people do like to see each other. Mm-hmm. And we're all in kind of a waiting game at the moment. And I'm wondering, well, how long do we have to wait? Because the fact of the matter is, I'd love to see my colleagues again. I'd love to get together with them again And I think once we're through that, there will be a land rush of people wanting to do that, if nothing else, because they haven't seen their colleagues physically in a while. And I think that's the bigger question, is what does that look like? It's not trust. It's just that human need to be together and physically touch and see people.
Yeah, and I agree. And for what we see is that people are dying to go to the job site. So on the implementation side, besides workers and, other kind of, employees. So on the construction side, we see that people are dying to go on the site because it's been many months and there's work to do, and we are going to start up the projects. We need to see a site, we need to see the people. So what do? So there are all kinds of COVID measures, the COVID safety, PPE, temperature checks, checklists you have to do to get on site. And also we see an emerging trend that when you go on site, but it could be subsidized with some kind of technology to do it virtually. So we are exploring different options to do virtual walkthroughs the site, where people could wear a helmet with a camera on the top of the head and walk through the space, whether real time or recorded video and photo tour on a regular basis. It could be daily walk, it could be weekly walks. So what we find is, it could be a pretty good substitute for sidewalks to a certain level.
I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say, to that, I recently on a project, we had to have a punch walk, and normally I feel like you have to drag people to those. I have never had such a well-attended project punch walk.
Yeah.
And everyone was thrilled to be there. So people are dying to get out and interact in some capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's great because you guys are working for the tech companies, and then you're also you're architects too, or in the construction world. And so the technology that you guys are working is, you previously were integrating into building systems and food ordering, and now this technology is getting to be implemented into the construction world and given as tools to the architectural profession. So we had a question about on the lines of parking lots and buses. So if we're reducing the number of people coming in, parking lot sizes might go down. Has there been any discussion about buses to and from San Francisco?
I don't have buses. I have an opinion on them. Brett has buses.
Well, we don't have any buses right now.
Yeah.
It was our, like, of all the programs we have, it was the least utilized program in terms of the number of people it actually helped. The people who used it, it was very beneficial to them, but it's a very, very small percentage of our population. So I can't say for sure what's going to happen, but my personal opinion is that we won't see buses come back. I think there's going to be a major reduction by most companies. My concern is right now about all the people buying cars because they don't want to use public transportation. But I think we will see a net decline in the number of parking spaces we need over time because more people are going to, if we take advantage of the opportunity to either stagger the days people come in or just get smart about it, we can get more people in the same amount of space. And I think municipalities are going to have to start changing their zoning requirements so that they can adapt to companies allowing this, like the same number of people to use less spaces, because we can find ways to adjust and adapt as opposed to just having more and more and more and more, because it's a really wasteful thing and none of us want more cars on the road here.
Yeah. I can see the scenario right now. It's like somehow we get over this COVID and everybody's kind of like, you can go back into work now and it's great. Nobody wants to take public transportation. There's no buses. Nobody wants to get on a bus. Everybody hops in their car. And for 6 months, it's the worst traffic nightmare you've ever experienced on the planet, even worse than you've already experienced here in the Bay Area. And then people say, okay, I can't do this. Now we're going to stagger shifts. Now I'm going to work remotely 3 days a week. Now, and everybody falls into like, hey, this is 50% better than what I was doing before because I can come into the office 50% of the time. That's cool. I'll do that. and we're all just manage our schedule around the commute hours. Because the human nature will be they're going to be single occupant vehicles more than you've ever seen in the Bay Area for a period of time once the light is green to go.
That's unfortunate. I will share, I do know that Apple is continuing to bus. They're using the BTA bus stops in my neighborhood, and they have a person stationed at each of the stops that does a temperature check, and they're there in the morning commute, and they switch the side of the street for the evening commute. So there are people getting on the buses, and Apple is,
Microsoft is still providing our campus buses up in Redmond, because we have a huge, Redmond campus is a city basically. And they have a bus system, but they have spacing. There's only a very small number of people on one bus at any time. But I think these things those are temporary sorts of things. I just think the bus program in general, the idea of busing people around the Bay Area, was all to do with you have to come to the office every day. As soon as you don't have to come to the office every day, people are going to live out in Tracy. They'll live anywhere if they only have to come in a couple days a week, and then they'll be on the roads those days, but it'll still be, instead of 5 days, I'm on the road 2 days. And if that multiplies across lots of tech companies, you'll see in time, after the period John is talking about, you will see, I think, a reduced, parking requirement and traffic requirement.
Yeah.
Well, I did kind of want to mention that I like the nice thing about, say, this remote working and is that we kind of have been able to get a kind of like a personal glimpse at people's lives. So John's got the guitar, and Lucida's got her architectural library. And the Library of Congress here. But I think I think it's kind of humanized people a lot. I know though that there's been numbers showing that, at least from architectural standpoint, that people have suffered in terms of getting new clients and retaining them without that kind of personal in-person meeting. And that kind of goes outside of the work environment. So we just have a couple minutes here, and then we'll have Chris give instructions on we're going to break up into kind of like networking rooms. But Brett, I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on something you briefly touched on, but we were speaking about it last week, was this kind of, in terms of designing spaces, but actually thinking about making spaces that when we go to them, they actually make us healthier. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. I think that's a nice thing to end on for the future.
Yeah, well, I've seen one product that is claiming to do this, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know if anyone else has seen a product called Biome, but it's a plant wall that has fans built into it, and it pulls air through it. And these are plants planted in a planting medium, no soil, but their claim is that they can filter air through the roots of these plants, and it is in fact far cleaner when it comes back out than when it went in. And they even claim that the roots are a really good attractor of things like virus particles, and that they basically become food for the plants. I watched a few presentations. I had them come talk to us. I learned about the science behind it. I really want to believe it, and I hope it's true because it's fascinating. But I think between being able to be outside, bring fresh air in, the ability to bring, and we've never been, Google was always far better than we were about, biophilia and bringing plants into space and bringing, having kind of a healthy, a very intentional, healthy environment. Plants for us were kind of like, we really wanted to get into that, but it represented a huge maintenance headache, and it turned into, well, the operations team is just going to buy a bunch of plants that nobody really likes, and then they're just going to be plant guys walking around with the little sprayer spraying plant. It wasn't very intentional. So I think we should have a goal. As an industry, we should have a goal of, instead of indoor space being less healthy and the least healthy place you can be. So we've been piloting we're about to deploy a whole bunch of sensors we never had before, environmental sensors across all of our buildings. And we're piloting a couple different products right now in our houses, everybody on the team, so we're testing results. It's shocking the amount of particles, bad particles that will build up, and CO2 that will build up in your room that you're sitting in all day. Where, and the difference of opening a window, because I look at I can see the stats on my phone. When it gets really high, it sends me alerts. I open the window and like 30 seconds later, it's way back down to normal levels. And most of us don't have that opportunity in workspace. We're in hermetically sealed boxes that don't connect outdoors. So one of my goals for our long-term future is to start to develop buildings that are much more connected to the outdoors than the ones we've ever done before, and to push our developer partners who are doing buildings for us to not give us buildings that are hermetically sealed, especially in climates like this one, where there's no excuse for doing it, because the temperature differential between indoor and outdoor is a couple of degrees. So really, the issues you're trying to mitigate are very able to be dealt with. And I think it's just convincing everyone to move beyond what we've always done, convincing developers, not convincing, telling developers that we won't take anything less than a building that's healthier. And this goes, you know, in China, buildings have a rating, especially in Beijing, they have a rating based on their air quality indoors because it's healthier than outdoors. And I hope in most other places in the world that is not the case, and I hope that doesn't become the case here. But right now, common knowledge for me and for the things we talk about is that it is less healthy inside than outside. And if we're going to ask people and compel them to come to the office, then we better somehow make it a place that you feel healthier, mentally healthier, physically healthier after spending time in our spaces. So that's a really lofty and aspirational goal, but it's one we're putting in front of ourselves.
Letitia, Kendra, John, any final remarks?
I think it's spot on what Brett said. I think ultimately, you know, that addresses the fear that people will have coming into the office. If it is healthier for them to do so, they'll be much more inclined to come in. And somehow we have to figure that out. In a sense, it's kind of what we're trying to figure out right now. It's just, you know, the solution isn't there, and there's too much possibility of being infected at this point. Eventually that will dissipate, but the issue won't go away. Again, just a common cold. People will say, I don't want to get the common cold, so I need to come into an environment that's healthy for me. And if you have that, you're going to be more inclined to come in.
It does seem like even before all of this, that it's something that a lot of the employers were already really attuned to is wellness and fitness, and, you know, even down to like the with who took the most steps. So it feels like this is almost a natural progression. We're maybe having to speed it up a little bit right now, but I think it already feels to me like most employers were already really aware of making sure that the employees that went to work for them felt that their health was always under consideration too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. Perhaps there could be a conversation about behavioral change. The office culture is about, well, when you're sick and you push through, right? Oh, okay, and a little sneeze and a little cough, I would continue to stay in the office. Maybe it's a conversation that, no, you got to take care of yourself in order to take care of others. So this kind of behavioral change, you know, should definitely be in the equation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, thank you everyone.